Hey everybody, my name is Matthew Colville, and this is the fifth in my series in which we make a fighter in every edition of Dungeons & Dragons. I originally thought that Duncan the Fifth would be rolled up using the second edition D&D rules, but, all of these videos tend to involve a lot of research and reading, and that's part of what makes them fun. I had thought they'd be short little 10-minute videos to make it easy for you to watch all of them in one go and see how a fighter has changed over time. But really, it's more of an archaeological dig where I delve into why these design decisions were made and sort of the sociology of the players, how they used the game, the psychology of the designers. And so I did some research, and instead of jumping straight to 1988 and second edition D&D, we're going to take a little detour into 1986 and what could be called the patch for AD&D, just as Greyhawk in 1976 was the patch for the original edition in 1974. This book, The Unearthed Arcana, which came out in 1986, was something of a patch to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It's a book, it says by Gary Gygax, but I'm not sure that's true because The Unearthed Arcana is a compilation of articles from Dungeon Magazine, which was TSR's monthly, what they call a house organ, a magazine that is designed just to promote some other company's products, or a company's products, in this case TSR's D&D line. So Gary took a lot of those articles, and many of which I don't believe he wrote, and he would edit them together and wrote a bunch of new content, and so he gets to put his name on the cover. And all my friends used this book. We all had a copy of it, or at least everybody that played D&D had a copy of it, and that's because they very cleverly, and this was a strategic decision, and you will see why, they made sure there was content in here for both players and game masters. And everyone I knew, their copy fell apart. The leaves, the pages would just fall out of the binding, and I always wondered why that was, but now I think I may have a little bit of insight into it. So as I said, this book came out in 1985, I'm sorry. So yeah, it was already out by the time I started playing. And I did a little research as to who decided that they needed to put out another book of rules. And interestingly, I found this really a great interview with Gary from a website. I will put a link to it in the About box, which you can find underneath the like button, wink, wink. And I already knew a lot about this because this has been covered elsewhere in other articles on various websites. But at this point in 1985, TSR, the company that Gary founded to publish D&D, was in dire straits. And it was generating a lot of revenue, but it had a colossal amount of debt. So it looked good, to certain buyers. And there was talk of other companies buying it. There was also a danger that they would go out of business because they owed so many people so much money. And they had generated a lot of revenue and then spent that on stuff like they had dozens of cars. They had 300 employees. That's a lot. They had 300 employees. And Gary said they probably only needed about 200. So in order to solve their financial problems, at least in the short term, Gary decided to work on this book. He calls a bank. I paid a call upon the bank to see if a small $50,000 loan could be provided to get them to print this book, and the bank said no. So that tells you what kind of state the company was in. But he had already told the creative staff to begin putting together the material from Dragon Magazine that would come to be known as the Unearthed Arcana. And if you read this, he talks about how it was purely a book they produced to generate a quick revenue. He's like, I know that if I put my name on something and we put it out, it will sell. And it did. As I understand it, it sold actually really well. But that also sort of explains why it fell apart, because they probably did not spend a whole lot of money printing it, since it was deliberately designed to kind of keep the company afloat. And it's got a lot of interesting content in it, some of which my friends and I used, some of which we didn't. It says here, this new material grew from my own campaign, articles published in Dragon, and with input from many dungeon masters and players. This book has a single purpose. And then he goes on to talk about how it's designed to make your game better. But that was not its purpose. It was designed to generate quick money to keep the company afloat. And it's got, Jeff Grubb provided some content and some editing. Kim Mohan. I met Kim Mohan. He was still working at Wizards of the Coast when I was employed there in 2000. And so here we have the first kind of adjustment to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. For some reason, somebody decided that the game needed a 7th statistic, and that statistic was Comeliness, which meant literal physical beauty. We already had charisma, and I think charisma is arguably the most misunderstood stat in the game, because it's always been used as a kind of force of personality, like your ability to convince other people to do what you want, either by charm or through other methods. But people I remember when we played, we always kind of assumed it had some element of good-lookingness, that if you rolled a high charisma, your character was good-looking. And so I think to a certain extent, Comeliness was there to kind of break the back of that problem and say, no. Charisma is not how you look. It is purely the strength of your will, your personality, your ability to get other people to do what you want. And so it's a very strange stat. Almost no one I played with used it. And it did not work the way the other stats did. And I did a little bit of research to see where did this stat come from originally. And it comes first from, the first time we find anything like it is in Dragon Magazine. And this was published in 1976, October 76. So this would have been around when the Greyhawk book came out for the original edition of the game, well before AD&D, edited by Tim Kask. And here we have some very embarrassing rules for female characters in D&D. And I don't know why they thought they needed this. It tells, again, remember I said it's a revealing little bit of sociology to read this stuff, but they really did think that, like, women were a different species. And that tells you a lot about the people who were playing and what they thought. Like, the notion that in this fantasy game, we should just treat men and women the same, right? And that compared to elves and dwarves, for instance, making a distinction between male humans and female humans is silly. But no, they thought it was super important. And they talked about it all the time. Remember Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Gary said, oh, you're not going to find any arbitrary bullshit about limits to female this, that, and the other thing, as though he did not think it was important. But he did think it was important because in those original Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rules, there were limits to female stats. He just thought that he thought there should be some. He just didn't think there should be too many, and I find that absurd. It's revealing regarding what they thought about. They thought about girls all the time, but they didn't really understand them, and they thought they were. So Len Lakovka, I'm sure you're an awesome dude, and I know you contributed a lot to the game, but gosh, this stuff is weird. So female characters get their own, okay, this is actually kind of cool. Female characters get their own level titles, right? A first level fighter is not a veteran, they're a fighting woman, and they can become a battle maiden, or instead of a hero, a heroine, or a Valkyrie. That's cool. Clerics can become eventually a sister or a canoness, and thieves start off as a wench, and then if they're really good at what they do, they could someday become a hag. What young lady doesn't look forward to someday being a hag? Or a jade, ? This is a definition of the word I was not previously familiar with. And then you can become a succubus if you're a female 1, 2, 3, for 4th level girl thief. You're a succubus, which is a monster in D&D. There is a literal monster in D&D called a succubus, which I have used many times to screw with my players in clever, funny ways. But again, like, just doing your job as a girl thief, you will eventually become this. You will be obviously your character doesn't change, but the term to describe them is this monstrous demon. Again, I refer you to my earlier statements about how they knew girls were out there, but they thought they were strange, otherworldly creatures. Magic users can become mystics and oracles and enchantresses, sorceress, and then a witch. And keep in mind, there's no These are just first level, second level, third level titles, but they're also very revealing. It's also interesting. I'm not sure what's going on here, but you'll notice that a girl fighter becomes second level at 1600 XP. But this is using the same rules from OD&D, original D&D in 1974. This is only 2 years later, so I don't believe this chart for experience points has changed, which means they thought that girls should level up faster than boys, which I don't know what the logic behind that was, but, whatever. So who am I to judge? Among the weird things we're going to see in this is not the weirdest. So we have here, instead of a comeliness stat, we have a beauty stat. And you know what? I think I remember this rolling they call it two 20-sided dice numbered 1 to 10. This is so strange to us now. But it used to be when you bought a 20-sided die, it was not labeled 1 to 20. It was labeled 1 to 10 twice. And I don't know why. It had something to do with the dice they got being used like in statistics and probability classes rather than being specially made for D&D. So you would roll basically two of these, and you would get 2d10 basically, and you would get a stat from 2 to 20, right? And they talk about what female characters can do. They can become fighters, magic users, thieves, and clerics. And remember, thieves came out at the same time as the paladin. So they could be these 4 classes, but you couldn't be a female paladin. Why? I do not know. Oh, actually, I think I do know. This is so, maybe I'm being judgmental here. I'm reading into this. Hopefully there are people who remember this watching the video who can come tell me what's going on. But notice that when they talk about beauty and exceptional beauty, they're being important to fighters, magic users, blah, blah. Clerics may not use their beauty if they're lawful, but chaotic clerics can use their beauty. Now remember, there was no good or evil in this edition. It was just law, chaos, and neutrality. So what they're saying is, if you're a good character, right, a paladin, not listed here, or a good aligned, a lawful cleric, you don't get to use beauty. Why? Because that is deceitful, that is manipulative. Good characters don't do that. Only chaotic characters do that. So a chaotic cleric can use her beauty score. So right out of the gate, we're exposed somewhat, I think, We've picked up this rock, and there are all these awful maggoty things crawling underneath it, and those things are the way they thought about women. In this, I don't think there's any. Maybe I've read all the Conan books. And I'm trying to think, like, what archetypes are they pulling off of when they're making women and beauty intertwined with seduction and evil? Like, as soon as gender is mentioned here, right, in the 3rd volume of the Dragon magazine, 2 years after the game came out, the association with women and beauty is chaos, which is to say evil. It's very strange. So if you are a fighting woman, in other words, a female fighter, you just out of the gate, you get seduction, charm men, and charm humanoid monster as spells, depending on how beautiful you are. In other words, if you are a very beautiful female fighter, your beauty is supernatural. You get these spell-like abilities. Seduction, I don't believe seduction was in the game before this. I think charm person was. But now it's charm man. And again, what do women do? Even women fighters, right? Forget women magic users. Forget a succubus, a female, a demon. This is an actual just everyday man-at-arms with boobs and a vagina. All of a sudden, you have magical powers if you are pretty enough. Which, I've known some pretty women. Don't get me wrong. So we find some ideas in here that would be used later on. We find the notion of horrid beauty. So if your beauty score is really, really low, you have kind of other supernatural abilities that are repulsive. We would find that same idea used in the Anti Paladin. I remember the Anti Paladin, instead of rolling 3 dice for his 3d6 for charisma, he'd roll 1d4. And if he rolled a 1 or a 2, then he was incredibly ugly. And if he rolled a 3 or 4, then he was incredibly beautiful. So that was kind of sort of an analogy here, except it was just that one character instead of an entire gender. So this is the first time we see how you look treated distinctly from your charisma, your force of personality. And as we go and look in the Unearthed Arcana, we find that you roll your beauty stat, here called Comeliness. After they expressly say this is not charisma, you roll it using 3 dice, and then you modify it based on your charisma. So if you are pretty and charismatic, you are even prettier. right? Charisma becomes like a force multiplier for your comeliness stat, such that if you have, an 18 charisma, you get +2 to your comeliness. And again, here we have how you look has certain magical properties associated with it, right? Eventually, it's like you can cast Fascinate on people if you have an unearthly beauty. And, this is something that I'm not sure where in fiction, what archetype they are drawing. There's obviously something in the zeitgeist of male gamers in the 70s where they had certain opinions about women and their role in, at least their role in fantasy, right? This is a fantasy game. I'm sure all these guys had mothers and wives and daughters and were all fantastic to them. But when it came to fantasy, my God, look at how much text they devote. It's the whole page is devoted to how pretty somebody is, more than a whole page. So none of us, I don't ever remember using comeliness. I think we may have used it once in a game that probably didn't last more than a couple of weeks. But you would die several times in the course of a regular campaign, and you might use different stat generation methods different times. Your GM would always be interested in trying something new. And so we might have tried comeliness once, but it became what's called a dump stat, which is to say it doesn't affect your hit points, it doesn't affect how much damage you do, it doesn't affect how hard you are to hit, so it became kind of... So the Unearthed Arcana had a lot of other interesting stuff in it, including a whole bunch of new classes. There were lots of different types of sub-races of the different existing races, like dwarves. You got gray dwarves, and there were gray elves. And these were ideas that would stick around, forever. Like every edition of D&D would have several sub-races, race being a term increasingly I consider problematic. And a huge chart about whether or not, how does this kind of elf get along with this kind of dwarf? Okay. Which I guess is useful. And then we get to the Cavalier, right? And this is the first, I think, apart from comeliness, this is the first big of the Unearthed Arcana. This is a new class. And the Cavalier, look at how much... Remember back in 1974, fighters didn't get any kind of special abilities. And most classes, even when they got special abilities, it would be like, I can... Like dwarves can detect shifting passages and stuff like that. Magic users can cast spells. But look at how much text the Cavalier gets. It's ridiculous. He gets bonuses to hit with various Cavalier weapons at different levels. And it goes on and on and on. It's all about his mount and mounted combat and expertise in weapons. And it's just insane, the degree to which, look, it keeps going. It's 2.5 pages. All of this is all stuff about the Cavalier. And my friends and I used this because it was that kind of arms race between melee classes like the fighter and casting classes. Eventually, the wizard can cast Wish, and he can alter reality. How does the fighter keep up? Well, for one thing, the Cavaliers can increase their stats over time. Every time you level up, you would roll dice, and there was a chance, I'm not going to get into how, but there was a chance that you could increase your strength, dex, and con, which are the important stats for a fighting class. And I remember I did that. My friends and I went, because I tended to play paladins, and they decided that the paladin was a subclass of the Cavalier, and that was kind of insane, by the way, because that meant the paladin got all this cool shit and got all the paladin stuff, which, by the way, look, like they didn't really change. They say right here, you get all the same stuff you got in the player's handbook. You just get all of the abilities and powers of the Cavalier, but you get this crazy experience point chart, which meant if you were playing, my friends would all yell at me because they didn't say this because it was the 80s, we didn't have this term yet, but that meant paladins were OP. They were considered, like, especially at low levels, which is where you spent most of your time, paladins got ridiculous bonuses. But we're not making a paladin or a Cavalier, we're making a fighter. So let's take a look and the fighter gets Weapon Specialization, which is a new ability. Only fighters can get it, fighters and rangers, which kind of shows you how borked, how badly designed the whole idea of subclasses are, which is listed here. For instance, paladins were subclasses of Cavalier, and rangers and barbarians were subclasses of the fighter. And to me, as a designer, that means that this is the base class, and then these are modifiers of it. But here under fighter, it's saying, well, the one cool thing fighters get, rangers also get, but barbarians don't. And to me, that's just like, that's bad design. Either fighters hand off everything they give to these other classes, or they don't. So this is this weird, again, we have all these weird hybrids, like dwarves being in the original game, being able to switch back and forth between classes. And here, fighters get this cool thing that makes them special, but also rangers get it, but barbarians don't. So, very strange. Only members of the fighting class, blah, blah. So, the way weapon specialization works is it gives you greater bonuses to hit and damage, but you know how to use fewer weapons. Because weapon specialization, as it says here, counts as 2 weapon proficiency slots. That says a fighter may, so this was optional. Like you could roll a fighter and say, no, the choice they were offering was either know how to use many different weapons or weapon specialize. I know how to use fewer weapons, or maybe even only one, but I'm really good at it. I have a greater bonus to hit and a greater bonus to damage. Well, why would you ever choose to use more weapons? What's the advantage there if I'm getting actually ultimately +3 to hit and +3 to damage for being weapon specialized? That seems huge. What's the advantage? If there's a choice, what's my alternative? It must be pretty fucking good if it competes with +3 to hit and +3 to damage. No, it's not that good. It's this, right? It's the armor class adjustment table based on what weapon you're using. And again, I didn't know anybody that used this, although people have commented and said, yeah, we did. But this is a weird table. It never made any sense. It literally doesn't make sense because it says armor class adjustment 1, 2, 3. But you had to know, and Gary talks about this, you had to know that when it says, if you're using a battle axe against somebody with an armor class of 2, you're at -3. You had to know that it's not really armor class 2. It's actually a specific combination of armor and shield that gets you to armor class 2. If you got there some other way, like you had worse armor but it had a magical bonus, that wasn't supposed to count. Right? And so you just had to know that, armor class 2 here means plate and shield. Armor class 1 means full plate and shield. So if you were wearing like chainmail and shield and it was a magic shield and that's how you got to armor class 2, the battle axe did not give you that -3 penalty because it was really based on armor and types of armor and the idea that there's plate armor and chain. And so that was the thing fighters got, was they could use they had more weapon specializations than anybody else, so they could use more weapons, and so they could kind of choose, they made choices in battle which weapon to use based on the armor of their opponent. And that is kind of a cool idea. If you could pull that off in a simple way, which this is not, that's kind of a cool idea. I like it. But in no way does it compete with weapon specialization. So the first time you take, say, I get a certain number of weapon proficiencies. I don't remember how many, and I'm going to spend 2 of them to be specialized in longsword, right? Sword and board. I get +1 to hit and +2 to damage. If I double specialize, right, which means I spend another weapon proficiency, I now get +3 to hit and +3 to damage, and I think I could do this. A fighter or ranger may either initially or at any later time. So you could do this even at first level. You could double specialize, and all of a sudden, out of the gate, in addition to whatever bonuses you were getting from your strength, which in this edition, in Unearthed Arcana, watch out, because you're going to have a high strength, and you'll see why in a minute. So the reason I decided to make a whole video for this. Look at that. We're already at 28 minutes, I think. So it's not a short video. +3 to hit and +3 to damage. So going online and reading about this, I discovered that weapon specialization is actually a hotly contested issue among people that still play AD&D. And let me tell you, there's something like 1.5 million people out there playing AD&D every month. That's right. Like when I worked for a little while at Wizards of the Coast, and I had access to their marketing survey and their marketing data. One of the only companies in the business big enough to do legit market survey stuff. And they discovered that people who started playing in the 80s, people generally stick with whatever edition they started with. And the number of people that hop from one edition to another is just not that great. So there are still people out there, or certainly there were still people in 2007, which is a couple of years ago, but 20, 30 years after the UA was published, were still, or after AD&D, they were still arguing about weapon specialization. And this guy and several other people in this thread on Dragon's Foot, which is kind of it's a forum devoted to the original edition of D&D. I'll link to this in the About box, and you can read it. This guy does a good job. A couple other people do, saying, we just didn't use it. We ruled that it was not legal because it makes it so that it's a false choice. Like, you should just always do it. You should always, if you are a fighter, you should always weapon specialize. And again, it's a patch, an attempt, an ongoing attempt, along with Percentile Strength, to make fighters compete with magic users. And, it's not clear to me that any amount of damage on the part of a fighter will do that. Fighters also get weapon specialization. If you're weapon specialized, you get, look at this, out of the gate, if you're first level, you get 3 attacks every 2 rounds. That's what this means. This is kind of hard to decipher if you don't kind of come to it with understanding already. But number of attacks per round means 3 every 2, means on the first round, I get 1 attack. On the second round, I get 2. On the third round, I get 1 attack. On the fourth round, I get 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And that works out to 3 attacks every 2 rounds, right? So by the time I'm 7th level, I'm getting 2 attacks per round. Plus 3 to hit and plus 3 to damage. I can do a colossal amount of damage. The problem is that magic users can do things that alter reality. They can create illusions, they can charm people, they can polymorph people, they can stop time, they can cast wish. It's crazy. There's just no way. So everyone I know used this all through the 80s and the 90s. It didn't really occur to us that this was broken, although we never really, there was always a point in every game I played or I ran where it was around 7th level where wizards started to just get ridiculously powerful, and there was no way in combat for the fighter to keep up. And really the only thing that fighters had to compensate was all the fighter characters ended up as lords, and they were involved politically. So more often than not, you were on an adventure because of something that happened in the fighter's domain, in his duchy or his dukedom or his barony or whatever. And wizards just got more powerful. So in order to, let's see. So fighters get their first super cool ability, weapon specialization, which we all used. And we also have another way to generate characters, which we're going to use for Duncan the Fifth, and that is Method 5. And again, one of the reasons we're stopping here in 1986 to look at the Unearthed Arcana is that I used this. My friends and I used this, especially in my Birthright game. This is Method 5, and the way it says to use human player characters. Another instance where they're trying to make humans special, right? Gary believed in a world. First of all, he believed in rules, which if you applied would simulate the world around you. The world you saw in Greyhawk, the fantasy world, right? So especially for creating human heroes, but then you put that in your best stat, but then your other stats suffer. So this was another attempt to try and make sure that to balance 2 tensions. And the first tension was you want to be able to play what you want to play. I want to play a fighter, therefore I need a good strength. I want to play a wizard, therefore I need a good intelligence. But at the same time, back then, they wanted you to have to roll. They wanted there to be some randomness there. And later editions would just obviate this entirely and say, no, you're just going to either spend points, in which case all characters are equally balanced, or we're just going to give you a list of stats and you can put them where you want. But everyone's getting the same list, so there is no randomness. But they still very strongly believed in randomness back then, but they also wanted you to play who you wanted to play. So this is their kind of kludge, their kind of weird solution. And my friends and I did use it, but we felt weird while we were doing it. It got kind of the point where we were thinking, why not just use a matrix? We didn't say that. A matrix meaning just a list of stats. Like, okay, all 3 of you guys are going to get a 16, 2 14s, 2 12s, and a 10. And then you put them wherever you want. So everybody has a 16. The magic user puts it in intelligence, the fighter puts it in strength. But here, this list shows us how many dice we roll to generate the stat. So instead of 4d6, take the highest 3, my fighter is going to roll 9d6 for his strength and take the highest 3. right? And the lowest number you would roll is 3d6. And here, there's Comeliness. We're not going to use it. So this is the chart we're going to use to roll Duncan's stats, and I predict we're going to get an 18 strength, but we'll find out. So the first stat, let's get going. The first stat, let's look at his character sheet. Here's Duncan the Fifth. He's still a veteran fighter. He's still lawful neutral. I don't know how many languages he speaks. That won't have changed from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going to fill all that stuff in later. How much cash you generate, I don't believe changes. I'll look into that. So my first stat we're going to generate is Strength. And I'm going to roll 9 dice, which the way we do that in Fantasy Grounds is I pick up a die, and then I right-click another 8 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've literally never rolled this, man. I didn't know it did that in a little circle. Okay, so here we go. Top 3 from this. So I did get 3 sixes, 6, 6. I got 4 sixes. So my strength is an 18, and that means I get to roll percentile strength. Which was yet another thing that made fighters cool, was that they got to roll percentile strength. So here we're going to do that. Can I grab this and can I do that? No, it just does that. So here we go. I'm going to roll percentiles and see, and let's hope we get something really cool. Oh, 93! 93 is really good. 1893 is going to give me a pretty substantive bonus. It's not 1800, but it's probably the next best. This is really good. This is as good as, it's reasonable to hope for. You'd have to roll a lot of characters to get 1800. So what's next? My intelligence is 3 dice. Just straight up, whatever this is what I get. So that's not bad. That's a 12. 5 and 4 is 9, and 3 is 12. So intelligence 12. I lucked out there. I only had 3 dice. I could have very easily rolled a 3 or a 4 or a 5. And then we're on 5 dice for my wisdom. I don't know why exactly. Why are fighters? I don't know why they thought fighters tend to be more wise than smart. Oh wait, I'm sorry. It's 5 dice, right? It's 5 dice for wisdom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6 and 4 is 10, and 3 is 13. So I'm doing okay. Duncan is going to be all right. But you can see how it is generating the kind of fighter that you would be happy to play. Dex 7 dice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, here we go. So that is an exceptionally roll low for 7 dice, it seems. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dice below the average. So it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Sorry, I do not get an exceptional dexterity. But I might get an exceptional constitution. I get 8 dice for my constitution. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've got 18 constitution, yep. I imagine that probably a lot of people on 7 dice, probably, well, let's see. No, not really. I guess 7 dice, you'd get 1 6, maybe another 1. It's not very likely you'd get more than 2. So Constitution is 18. That's great. And then my Charisma, which is 6 dice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And here, unfortunately, that 6 dice for Charisma only got me 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's too bad. But actually, probably I got 1, 2, 3, 4 dice below average and 2 dice above average. So I would have tended to have gotten a little bit better than 9, but not much better. So apart from that stat generation method, and apart from my weapon specialization, which I am going to be, Duncan is going to be weapon efficiencies. I'm just going to write down long sword, double specialization. Duncan is going to be just as he's going to be in all other ways. We'll fill out his stats. He's going to be the same. Oh, he gets hit points. So I forget, is it D10 for hit points? I'll look it up. He's going to be the same as Duncan the 4 in all of the ways. He's going to have the same saving need to. In fact, let's fix that. So let's find out how many hit points Duncan the Fifth has. He gets a D10 just like Duncan the Fourth did, and his Constitution is 18, whereas Duncan's was 14. So Duncan got no bonus, and in fact, I believe that an 18 con gets me +4 only because I'm a fighter. If you're not a fighter, the best hit point adjustment you can get is +2. So fighters become meatier. This is all in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rules. This is not unique to Unearthed Arcana. Fighters can be more of a meat shield, and they also can do more damage now. But between the Percentile Strength, which we figured out, and the Weapon Specialization, fighters are tougher and deadlier. So let's see. What's a D10 plus 4? Straight up, let's see. If I roll a 1, then my hit points are going to be less than Duncan's, who had no bonus. I rolled an 8. So 8 plus 4 is 12. So out of the gate, Duncan the Fourth. So it's been, I think, 4 or 5 years. 1979, the Player's Handbook for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons came out. 1985, so 6 years. In those 6 years, fighters got a lot stronger. Right? I rolled exactly the same hit points as Duncan the Fourth did, but Duncan the Fifth gets 4 more hit points. Because he has a higher stat, because he was rolling a ridiculous number of dice to get that constitution. So my hit points go up. I've filled out all my stats here, and notice that 1893 is indeed as good as it's. There's no difference between 93, 94, 95, 96. It's only when you get to 18/100, 1800 on the percentile dice, that you get like +3, +5. So here we are. The difference between 1837 +1 +3 and 1893 is substantive. I get 1 more bonus to hit and +2 more to damage, which means this is where stuff gets crazy. When we get down here to our weapon stuff, our weapon information, right? Our attack matrix hasn't changed. This is the last time we're going to see an attack matrix in D&D. The attack matrix hasn't changed, but my bonuses to hit and damage are radically different. Because here, I still get 4 weapon proficiencies. That hasn't changed. Oh, I forgot to write down a number of attacks per round. But I am double specialized in longsword. That's what those 2 asterisks mean. I spent 1 of my 4 weapon proficiencies on longsword, and then another one to specialize, and then another one to double specialize. So that means I can only use 2 weapons. I only have 1 left. I can use a sword and a bow. Because you don't want to be fighting like a manticore that can fly, and all you have is a longsword. You will be screwed. I have been there. So my bow damage and to hit isn't anything special, but now with my longsword, I am +5 to hit, right? Whereas Duncan, I don't think he had any bonus. No, he was +1 to hit. I'm now +5 to hit, and I do a D8 +8. Right, that's 5 from my ridiculously high strength, and 3 more from my double weapon proficiency specialization. So, and now I'm doing 3 attacks per round. So I need to write down attacks per round somewhere. My character sheet is now starting to get kind of wonky, and you will see by the time we get to 2nd edition, we're going to need like something real. We're going to need like just writing it down is going to start to get incredibly messy, because you're like, where do I put all this information? So longsword, and I get. Let's put comma. Attacks per round, 3 every 2. That's not true of my bow. It's only true of my sword. So I'm on the 2nd round of combat. I'm going to be +5 to hit. So I'm probably going to hit both times. And I'm going to do a minimum. If I hit both times, if I roll a 1, that's 9. I'll do 18 damage. So in the 2nd round of combat, it is likely, especially with a +5 to hit, that I will do 18 damage minimum. Average damage would be 4.5 times. It's 8 plus 8 plus 8. That's like, what is that? 24 damage on average. That's ridiculous. There are few things that you'll face, especially at that level, that can stand up to you. And it created this crazy escalation where monsters needed more special abilities to deal with fighters, and that just made fighters more frustrated because the only thing they could do was damage. There's only really 1 edition of the game, I think, that has fixed this, and we will get there. So Duncan the Fifth, using Method 5 and double weapon specialization, got crazy good stats. He speaks the same number of languages. That hasn't changed. His armor class has changed a little. No, actually, I went back and revised. Duncan the Fifth, his defensive adjustment counts toward his armor class. So his 6 that he had from studded leather and shield should have been 5. So Duncan the Fifth is a little bit easier to hit, but he is unbelievably deadly in combat compared to every other. Forget Duncan the Fourth. No other character that we've generated so far can compete with Duncan the Fifth. His gold is he has a little bit more gold left because he couldn't afford to buy a halberd or a dagger, right? But apart from that, he is incredibly deadly. And in fact, I would say for the GM, a character like Duncan the Fifth is going to be problematic. Challenging him, monsters that challenge Duncan the Fifth will obliterate the rest of the party, right? And the monsters that challenge the rest of the party, Duncan the Fifth will just wade through like a knife, like a hot knife through ice, a hot knife through thin ice. I read somewhere. So, is there anything else to say about Duncan the Fifth? I don't think so. This is the end of the attack matrix. Starting in the next video, we're going to enter into the incredibly strange realm of Thaco, which, if you don't know what that is, you're lucky, because I had to suffer through it for many years. And this is one of those, I'm not an edition warrior. Second edition was the only version of the game I never really got burned out on. We just played other games. But it's dumb, and you'll find out why. So I hope that you enjoyed this detour into the Unearthed Arcana and got a little bit of insight into where the game was going and the decisions the designers were making. A constant effort on their part to improve the fighter compared to the magic user. And in this case, they did it through really one cool ability, Weapon Specialization, in a book that was created just to generate some quick and ready cash for TSR. Alas, it did not save Gary at the company. He was ousted shortly thereafter. And next time we meet, we will make Duncan the Sixth